I recently got back from Japan. These are the two handhelds that I decided to bring with me, and honestly, there was one in particular between these two that I found myself kind of gravitating more towards. Don't get me wrong, I like the Odin, but there's one thing about this that's kind of been throwing me off, but I've only ever noticed it ever since getting the Retroid Pocket Mini. When you're moving down like this, or you're moving anything on the screen, there is some blur. The pixel response on this IPS is definitely not as good as an AMOLED, and that's one thing that I've just kind of been bothered by. It's still pretty good. Everything on the Retroid Pocket Mini just feels much more smoother thanks to that AMOLED display. If you're sensitive to that smearing on the display, well, you're not alone because it definitely bothers me too. Now on the other hand, the Retroid Pocket Mini has been fantastic. Everything just feels super smooth. As I scroll down, it's like instantaneous. There's barely any ghosting when I'm moving. I've actually been picking up this more than the Odin 2, and for a few reasons. The display on this looks a lot brighter, but one thing I definitely notice is the colors. They're a lot more vibrant, and of course you get those perfect blacks because this is an AMOLED panel. So when I was in Japan, I would pick up this one more than the Odin 2, and for that one reason, the display is just fantastic. Obviously though, this is a small device, and not everybody's gonna like that size. I think Retroid just made the perfect combination of these two devices. This is where the Retroid Pocket 5 comes in. Today let's open this up, take a closer look at it, and see if it's worth your money. I think people looking at the Odin 2 should look at this as a good alternative. This is a little bit cheaper, but you get a much better panel. You also get a lot of the same things that you would get on the Odin 2, like good grips, good screen, good speakers, and so much more. So let's open this up and take a closer look at the Retroid Pocket 5. So let's just hop right in. Let's take a closer look to see what the Retroid Pocket 5 is. Underneath the handheld section on Retroid's website, the two latest models are the Mini and of course the Retroid Pocket 5. This one is only $19 more than the Mini. Both of these share very similar specs. They both have that Snapdragon 865. This should give us plenty of power for almost anything that you want to run. Retroid has also taken the step up to UFS 3.1 storage. This makes this device and the Mini start way faster. We also have that beautiful AMOLED screen on both. The only difference is the Mini comes in at 3.7 inches with 1280 by 960 at 60 Hz. They both have active cooling. The Mini has a smaller battery as well, but both have Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.1. The Retroid Pocket 5 on the other hand comes in with 8GB of RAM as opposed to the 6 on the Mini. We still have that UFS 3.1 on here and a microSD card slot. This one also comes with Android 13, but you should be able to upgrade the Mini to Android 13 eventually. This one also has a much better screen, I think for most people at 5.5 inches. This is also an AMOLED, but it's 1080p. We still get that 60 Hz though, with active cooling and a slightly bigger battery. Retroid kept this thin, so they had to put a 5000 mAh battery in there. I kind of wish that they put a 6000 just to get a little bit more battery life out of it, but the 865 is still really power efficient. We get full analog triggers and Hall effect joysticks. Now the software on mine is going to be a little bit different because I have a pre-release model. The bugs should be ironed out by the time people get these. The one I have is the 16-bit model, so let's take a closer look at it. Now just a disclaimer as well, Retroid did send this over for a review. As with all my reviews, the company has no input in what I say. They're not seeing this review beforehand, and of course they didn't pay for this review. I just give you guys my honest, unfiltered thoughts to what I think about these. So let's open this up and take a closer look at the Retroid Pocket 5. Retroid has kept the same box for the last couple generations. As well, this was sealed when I got it. I just opened it up just to take a quick peek at the color, but I haven't turned it on yet. Retroid has always done a good job at packing these. In the case, we have the handheld itself, and I can already tell this feels a lot more premium than the last model. There's a little manual here, shows some of the specs, and an overlay of the device. Under that, we have a USB cable. It's just USB-A to USB-C. Let's take a closer look at the device itself. Right off the bat, you got that full glass front. I think this thing looks pretty nice. It's got that perfect retro gray to it. and the same nice face buttons we've been looking forward to on a lot of Retroid devices. It also has that same D-pad from the last couple generations, and the same joysticks. It's not a bad thing because these are excellent joysticks, they've always made good D-pads, and I've always liked their face buttons. On the back though, we start to see some differences from a lot of their other handhelds. This thing actually has grips on the back. This is a first for Retroid. The Mini also has grips on the back, but these ones are much more pronounced. I also like the texture that they put on the bottom. There's also a nice big ventilation port on the back. There's also a filter at the top, so you're not getting a lot of dust on the inside. Another thing that I'm noticing is this thing is just so thin. I think you could fit this in your pocket pretty easy. This is a big problem with a lot of these bigger handhelds because a lot of these are very thick thanks to these grips. However, one thing that Retroid did was keep these grips smaller than the triggers themselves, but they also didn't have the triggers stick too far out. Yeah, all in all, I think this is a really good first impression on this device. It looks really nice. So I want to compare this to a few other handhelds. First thing, let's compare this to the Mini. If we line these two straight up in the center, the Mini is a little bit taller, but it's also a little bit slimmer. The Mini also has a lot bigger bezels. This one barely has any. That screen is pretty impressive. The Retroid Pocket 5 is also a lot thinner than the Mini. The triggers themselves look to be pretty similar though. All in all, very different handhelds, but they both look very premium and they feel premium too. Now I don't have my digital calipers and not really sure where they went as I just moved into a new office. At first glance, this also looks very similar in size to the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, but this feels a lot bigger. I think this is largely in part due to the bezels being smaller on this and the screen also being ever so slightly wider. The controls also come out on the side a little bit further, and I do think that makes the device feel a little bit better. Something I didn't like about the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro was these corners. They were only a little bit rounded, but they had mostly square edges, and that kind of cuts into your palm. It was comfortable to use, but the rounded edges on the bottom make the Retroid Pocket 5 much more comfortable overall. I could definitely play on this all day. The ergonomics on this thing are just on point. These are also very similar in thickness, but I do think that the Retroid Pocket 5 is ever so slightly thinner. The triggers and bumpers on these is pretty identical. The shape has changed a little bit, but the material still looks the same. The texture's the same. This one is just more rounded, whereas this one kind of looks more like a paddle. Looking at those side by side though, there is one big difference. The triggers on the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro stick out further than the shell, whereas the triggers on the Retroid Pocket 5, they come out to the same height as the shell. One thing I noticed is that the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, the triggers do get stuck when you're putting this in your pocket. This is not the case with the Retroid Pocket 5. And you're going to see the back is much different too. This has grips. The Retroid Pocket 4 Pro doesn't. This makes this device much more comfortable to use overall. It's a little bit thicker as a result, but it doesn't really feel thicker thanks to the grips not going out too much further than the triggers. Comparing this to the Odin 2, yeah, this is a lot smaller, but I think that's a good thing. We still have a pretty big display on this. This, however, is much more pocketable. I don't consider the Odin 2 pocketable at all, mostly because this is just too long. I can't put this in almost any of my pockets. These grips on this device are a lot more comfortable to use, but because they stick out further and these triggers are so flared, it does get stuck on your pocket. I consider the Odin 2 a very thin device, but it doesn't feel like it because of these grips. Taking a look at the Retroid Pocket 5, just overall, this is just so much more portable. This is almost too big, and it kind of replaces an x86 device in my bag, but this still feels like an ARM device, and that's a good thing. Let's compare the weight on all these devices just to see how this one stacks up. Let's start with the Retroid Pocket Mini. This thing comes in at 223.8 grams. It's a pretty light handheld, but it does feel solid and very high quality. The Retroid Pocket 4 Pro is heavier at 275.8 grams. The Retroid Pocket Mini and the Retroid Pocket 5 definitely feel higher quality than this. I don't know if it's the plastic or the density of the device, but this still feels like a high quality device, just not compared to those other two. Stepping things up to the Retroid Pocket 5, this one comes in at 272.2 grams. This is just ever so slightly lighter than the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, but it does feel higher quality. This is not a bad weight, and it's not a bad size. Comparing that to the Odin 2, this thing is just so much heavier at 426.3 grams. This is almost too big and too heavy to feel portable. Next up, let's talk about the build quality. There's definitely a big step up in build quality with this generation. I don't know what it is, if it's the plastic or the all glass front. Just overall, it feels much better. These buttons on the Retroid Pocket 5 also feel really high quality. It's the same joysticks though, and those already felt high quality. This feels like a similar build quality plastic to something that you see like on the ROG Ally X. This is good quality plastic. The grips feel really well designed, and everything feels very solid. It also doesn't feel very hollow when I tap it. All the buttons and triggers feel extremely high quality, and taking a closer look at the seam looks pretty good. There's no nicks or anything, and the overall design is just excellent. I've seen a few devices with small imperfections on the sides, but this one is just designed immaculately. With this latest generation, both the joysticks are on the bottom. This includes the Mini. For me anyways, I prefer the joystick on the left on the top, but as this is more retro-centered, they opted to put that D-pad on the top. Because this has grips on the back though, you can still use these joysticks and they feel very comfortable. You have to position your hand a little further down, but I don't think that's a bad thing, and it still feels quite natural to hold. These joysticks also have a good amount of resistance to them, and they don't feel too loose. There's a nice anti-friction ring, which is also an LED. This also looks really nice. This is also very smooth as I rotate the joystick. The top of the joystick is concave, and it's very grippy. It doesn't attract a lot of dust, and because it's gray, it also doesn't show a lot of the fingerprints. There's a nice texture on it. Overall, this is just really good. This sits high enough out of the device to be usable, but it's definitely not a full-size joystick. Overall, excellent joysticks. There's some nice face buttons on this. They're rubber membrane, they don't feel too clicky, and they're definitely a little quieter than the ones on the Retroid Pocket Mini. There's a good amount of travel to them, and they're not wearing on the side of the opening here. The bumpers and triggers have a nice design to them. They have a little bit of texture on it. I think that's really nice. There's also a good amount of travel on the trigger. This feels very natural, and there's a good amount of resistance to it. Not to the point of it being too much, but not to the point of it being too loose to feel cheap. The one thing about bumpers that I've seen on other handhelds is sometimes they're harder to push the more you go up. This sounds the same anywhere you push it, and there's no difference in pressure. You don't see the inside of the trigger when I open it like this because there's a little piece of black plastic there. Now we need to talk about the ergonomics because they're excellent on this device. I'll be honest with you guys, I use big handhelds most of the time because I prefer that big grip on the back. It just makes the device a lot easier to hold and way more comfortable to game on. Now that Retroid has included grips and rounded off these bottom corners, it's extremely comfortable to hold. This is no different on the Retroid Pocket Mini. With those grips, even at that size, that device is just extremely comfortable to game on. I played on the Retroid Pocket Mini for hours on the flight, and honestly, it didn't bother my hands at all. You have a lot of space on the back to spread out your hands, or you can bunch them over the grips like this. Either or, it's extremely comfortable. The plastic on my Odin is starting to wear away, so it doesn't look very good. But the grips on this are a little bit bigger. This is a little bit more comfortable, but I don't think I would make the trade-off for bigger grips and losing that pocketability. I do want some grip, but I don't want too much. You get too big of grips, it's just too hard to carry around with you. The Odin 2 is still very comfortable to use. The buttons feel a lot smaller on this though, even though they're probably similar in size. This device is just so much bigger. This is also very similar in size to some of the x86 devices like the iNeo Air. So this thing is just massive. The screen size and the ergonomics are this device's selling point. But now with the Retroid Pocket 5 in the scene, I honestly don't think that there's many reasons to get the Odin 2 over this. This is enough power for everything, but the ergonomics are just good enough. They're really nice. I actually am very impressed with this device so far. Retroid did a really good job designing this. I think you'll be very impressed with the build quality and the ergonomics. I just love the grip design on these new devices. They're just so much better than the previous generations. Like I said, you can still pocket these because they're still thin, But now Retroid has fixed that big issue, where these just weren't comfortable to play for long periods of time. Now they are. Now comes the best part of getting a new device, and it's turning it on. I'm really excited to see how this screen looks. You get that perfect black level. Oh, it looks so nice in person. These ones just start up a lot quicker too than the last generation. For a first startup, that's so quick. So one thing I'm instantly noticing is just, wow, look at how big that screen looks. It's because these bezels are so small. So unfortunately, I do have an oddity on my device. It looks like the screen is kind of off center. There's a little bit of a black line down the side. I don't think that's going to bother me too much, but it is something to take note of. You can see a little bit on the bottom as well, but it's not too bad. The top and the left side are also really good. Just to point out, this is a pre-production unit. There might be some small imperfections as I saw with that screen. However, in most gaming situations, I'm not even noticing that line, and these issues shouldn't be persistent on regular retail units. I did bring this up to Retroid as well, so they are aware of it. If you do notice imperfections in the device like I did, hop over to the Retroid Discord and fill out a customer support ticket. I found that's definitely the quickest way to get support with your device if you're having any issues. But all in all, I don't think that's going to be a problem for most people, and even with my screen here, I haven't been bothered by that. Let me show you how to get this set up quick. So I'm just going to go ahead and select my language, then connect to my Wi-Fi. It's going to ask you if you want to install any of these apps. I'm just going to go ahead and skip that because we're going to download the latest ones anyways. There's two different launchers here, the Retroid Pocket 5 launcher and just the AOSP launcher. I'm just going to use the AOSP launcher. That is such a quick setup. Now, the one thing that I like about these new units is the screen. Just look how smooth that is compared to the IPS on the Odin 2. The pixel response rate on these is just incredible. Now I gotta say, out of every device that I've used, this has the best panel, hands down. It is so bright, it has perfect uniformity, there's no light bleeding, no banding, nothing. Retroid picked an incredible panel. Some of the other things that I like to change, I'm going to go down here to the battery options. I'm going to go to the battery manager and I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to show the battery percentage. That was on by default. Make sure battery saver is off as well. Man, just look how bright that screen is. Sometimes you see videos of devices on YouTube and the screen just looks so good, it looks fake. This is genuinely the screen and I'm just very impressed how crisp this looks. If you look really closely, you're going to see how sharp this text is. The last couple devices that I reviewed had a little bit of light bleeding, so it's really nice to see a screen this good on a device. Look at that. It's just incredible. Man, that screen is just great. Let me put this down as I'm doing this setup so it's a little bit easier to see. I'm going to go to the sound and vibration and I'm going to shut off vibration and haptics. I like to turn on my do not disturb mode since this is a gaming device, not a phone. I also like to turn off the touch sounds and the charging sounds, as well as the screen locking sound. Under the display settings, I like to turn on the screen timeout to at least 10 minutes. And I am going to turn on the dark theme. All this screen up here that's just pure black is shut off. I haven't changed the screen color at all. This is just set to the standard mode, and I honestly think this is just perfect as is. You could set this to screen enhancement. I really don't see any difference. This just looks super vibrant and super crisp on both. One thing I don't recommend is just using this top mode because you don't want it changing during your gameplay. In the handheld settings, you can see that there's 14% of the storage has been used. That's 18 gigabytes just from the system itself. This is running Android 13. There's a few bugs, but they're going to get this ironed out by the time it's launched. There's also 8 gigabytes of memory. It's only using an average of about 27%. This leaves plenty of memory for your games. I don't think you're going to need any more than 8 gigabytes of RAM. In the handheld settings, you don't have to turn the L2 and R2 mode to both. This is going to be set that way by default. Controller style, I like to set mine to Xbox, but if you leave it retro, it's going to be what it looks like here. Google services and everything else are working fine, and you can disable the boot music from here as well. You can also run script as root, just like you could on other Retroid devices. Well, let me load this up with some games and some stuff, and I'll be back after I've set this up. Next up, I think we should check the Wi-Fi speeds on this. Overall, it's been pretty impressive, and everything that I've put onto this device is loaded pretty quick. I'm using the 5 GHz band, and I am getting some pretty decent Wi-Fi speeds. This is over my Wi-Fi 6 at home here. On average, I'm getting about 1.2 gigabits per second, or 1200 megabits per second. This is a really good internet speed. If you're looking to do something like streaming with this device, I think you'll be pretty impressed. All in all, no issues with the Wi-Fi so far, it's been super stable. Next up, let's do a boot test, and for comparison's sake, I'm going to put this against the Odin 2 just to show you how quick this is. Now that these are both off, let's turn back on at the same time and see how quick these two start up. It's pretty crazy to think that a Retroid device is now keeping up with the flagship from another company. The Snapdragon processor in this is a lot slower than the Gen 2, but for what you're going to use this for, this has been more than enough. However, that UFS storage on both of these is pretty comparable, and your startup speeds are definitely showing from that. Zooming in a little bit so you can see what's going on a little easier, I'm going to test the RAM on these two units just to see how quick it is. Now, I've already gone ahead and tested the RAM on this, so you can already see the results, but I'm just going to redo this test so you get a clear number. It's funny, but both of these are on max brightness, and you can already tell that the Retroid Pocket 5 is much brighter. I'm going to go ahead and test the RAM at the same time. Let's see what happens. RAM is pretty quick, so this shouldn't take too long to complete. So that's pretty interesting. The test finished at exactly the same time. Obviously, there's more RAM in the Odin 2 that I have here. But yes, the memory is much quicker in the Odin 2. The Odin 2 topped out at 70,000 megabytes per second, and the Retroid Pocket 5 topped out at 18,000 megabytes per second. I don't think this is going to impact gaming too much. I think the chip on these is going to become the bottleneck long before the memory speed is. Next up, let's hop over to the sound test. I like to load up Cave Noir for that classic retro style music, and it does sound really cool on both of these speakers. Let me show you what that sounds like. Fortunately, there is a way to adjust the built-in equalizer on Android itself. I've already done this with the Mini, but what you were hearing was the unedited audio from that. So I shut that off for this. Now let me show you what it sounds like with this equalizer on. I'm using the FX Booster mode. I'll let you pick to see which one you like better. Make sure to let me know in the comments if you think this improves the sound quality. I think it does, but it's always interesting to hear what people think. I've never used this on the Retroid Pocket 5, so I'm just going to try the mode that worked the best for the Mini. That was the FX Booster. But there's a whole bunch of different other modes here, or you can make a custom one if you prefer. Now, I do recommend doing a restart after adjusting the audio on this. The app that I'm using is called Sysequel. I'll link this in the description below if you're interested in trying this out yourself. I don't think that you'll have to keep this open though once this is changed, because this is changing the built-in equalizer of Android itself. So I'm going to do a quick restart and we'll check out that sound quality. The RP5 with that EQ on does boost up that bass ever so slightly, and it does sound still really clean and very clear. It does actually still have pretty decent bass even without that EQ. One thing that I was kind of shocked by was just how clean the audio on the Mini sounds too. We should definitely talk about the panel next. Just look at this. This is just incredible in my opinion. The Switch OLED already had a really good screen, but just look at it compared to the Retroid Pocket 5. The color on this screen as well as the brightness just so good, it almost looks fake, like I photoshopped it. This is definitely the panel though, just look at it. So I did have to adjust my f-stop on my camera a little bit to show this so it wasn't overexposed, but it doesn't look overexposed in person either. There's definitely a huge difference in panel quality between these two devices. I always found the Switch OLED pretty decent. It was a little dark for my liking, but these are both at max brightness. The Retroid Pocket 5 just wins in every regard. The colors are more vibrant, the blacks look really good on both, but everything is just showing up just perfectly crisp on this. This is so nice. I don't know how Retroid did it. How did they manage to fit a screen this good into a device that's only $219? The closest emulation device that I have compared to the Retroid Pocket 5 is of course the Mini, but if you want to look at something that has a similar screen size, somewhat close anyways, the Odin 2 is definitely the closest comparison. If I compare this to the Odin 2, the screen on the Retroid Pocket 5 just looks so much better in my opinion. The Odin 2 panel is still really nice and the colors are accurate, but this is just so much darker and less vibrant. I like the pure blacks on this screen, the colors look more vibrant, and it's much brighter. So is there any other IPS panel that I have that could come close to the vibrancy and brightness of the Retroid Pocket 5? Well, there's one, but it's an x86 handheld. So while the Legion Go screen is absolutely fantastic, you are getting much bigger bezels on this, as opposed to having no bezels at all on the Retroid Pocket 5. This is much brighter, and the colors are way more vibrant. But I'll let you be the judge. Which screen do you like? These are both still really fantastic screens. And honestly, I'm just kind of nitpicking at this point because both of these, I'm happy with either. This one is 2560 by 1600. This one is 1920 by 1080. So the pixel density might look a little sharper on this one. This is easily the best screen that I've seen on an ARM device. So is there any other screen that I have that might keep up with this screen? Well, there's one, but it's on my phone. I think this is a fascinating comparison. I actually have to compare screens now with phones because they're so good. This display here on my Poco F6 is a much better display on paper, but just look at how close these two are. To put into perspective, this is 2712 by 1220. This is 1920 by 1080. This has a contrast ratio of 5,000,000:1, 100% of the DCI-P3 color gamut. My phone also has a peak brightness of 2400 nits. This supports Dolby Vision and HDR10+. This is a 6.6-inch Flow AMOLED display, but I can tell you right now, these displays are just so dang close. They look so good. I'm absolutely shocked. How did Retroid manage to put this into this device? If you were bothered by the panel on your Retroid Pocket 3 or the 4 or the 4 Pro, and you definitely want the best screen possible for your gaming, you will not be disappointed by the panel on this. I know I just keep going in circles, but I'm just blown away by the screen on this thing. How is this just so good? Isn't that just incredible? I'm just at a loss for words because every generation we've been seeing small upgrades to the screen. Retroid broke that rule and they just put the best screen possible in this thing. At max brightness, this is visible in full sun and underneath these bright studio lights. At minimum brightness, you can not even see the screen because it gets so dark that, yeah, you would just... This is great for playing at night. So even with the lights completely off in the pitch black, you can barely see the screen. I can see this better with my eyes rather than what the camera is picking up. So it is a little bit more visible. But yeah, min brightness on this is just incredible. And you're not going to have any issues with the max brightness either. As far as screen issues go, I'm not seeing anything, minus the one line on the side, but that's just because mine is a pre-production model. There's absolutely no dead pixels on any color, and there's no uniformity issues. There's also no light bleed on any of the sides. That AMOLED panel is also working really good and giving us pure blacks. And I'm not seeing any ghosting as well. There's no banding issues, and colors appear smooth and gradients look nice as well. The viewing angles on this are also really good too. Because this is an AMOLED panel, we're getting some really quick response times. I'm not seeing any ghosting, and everything appears on the screen really quick and smooth. All in all, I'm just finding very little fault with this screen. Out of every Android device that I've tried, I'm more happy with this than any other one. Because this is an AMOLED panel, we're not getting any blooming issues like I saw on the Odin 2 Mini. This is just pure black, and it can just shut off those pixels as needed. The whites aren't fading off, they're just pure white. The biggest difference that most people are going to notice in real world scenarios is just less smearing. Thanks to that AMOLED panel, this does feel much smoother than these IPS screens. The one on the RP5 is showing this content much quicker. Whereas the Odin, you can kind of see the device is showing these words kind of smeared as it refreshes across the screen. There's a huge difference between these two screens. Thankfully, this is a true 60Hz panel. I have not had any stuttering issues or anything like that. All in all, just very impressed with the screen. As far as YouTube content goes, I can't go up to 8K, but I can do 4K 60. It does appear to look really good and quite sharp. Unfortunately, this device lacks any sort of DRM, so you're not going to be able to watch things like Prime Video. I also tried Disney Plus and Crunchyroll, and media just wasn't able to play on those. I don't think this is something that we're going to see added in the future, but if you're looking to play movies on this device, you can watch movies with Google TV or YouTube. Of course, it also plays local files on the device itself absolutely fine. And this chip is powerful enough that it should be able to play 4K videos at 60 FPS with no issues. I haven't really run into any performance issues yet, and a lot of the older systems are going to have some black bezels on the sides. One thing I'm noticing though is just the input latency, especially on these older systems, is just incredible. Basically, as soon as you hit it, you get a reaction. I think this is largely in part to the nice screen that this thing has. You're just kind of getting some low input latency because of it. One system in particular that I found looks really good on this is Game Boy Advance. You do get some bezels on the sides as well, but what you can do is just get some sort of overlay for that and it'll fill it out pretty good. You are going to notice this a lot less too if you have one of the black models. But yeah, the screen looks amazing and I'm not really worried about the performance on these older systems. So what I've done for GameCube is set the resolution to 4x native scaling, and I've also set this to Vulkan. I've set the anisotropic filtering to 8x. You also want to use hybrid Uber shaders, as that's going to compile these before the game starts so you don't get any stuttering. This is running at 60 FPS locked. I'm not having any performance issues. I still prefer the Dreamcast version, but it's kind of cool to see an enhanced version running at such a high resolution. This chip definitely has a lot of power. 3DS is another one that looks really good on this screen. I like to have the small screen on the side, but what you can do is just have this main panel fill up the main screen and then just swap to this bottom one as needed. This gives you even more space, but it looks really good on this screen. I've never seen this game look this nice on a device. But yeah, as far as emulation goes, I was able to do the same sort of systems as I am on my Odin 2 with no issues whatsoever. I was even able to play some high-end unnamed systems, and those ran a lot better than I thought they were. I mean, I had the Snapdragon 870 in my Poco F3 for quite a while before switching to the Poco F6, and the Snapdragon 870 is very similar in performance to the Snapdragon 865 in this, especially since this has active cooling. So with emulation running so good, what else can we look at? There's a few other things that I really like to check on these devices, including native Android performance. I played this on the Switch OLED and on my x86 handhelds, but I think this is the nicest I've ever seen this game look. You might see some banding across the screen, but that's just the way my camera is recording this panel. You're not going to actually see that in real life. The response time of that AMOLED makes gaming on this a lot more enjoyable than it is on the Odin 2. I was noticing a lot of smearing on the Odin 2 when playing this game. But as soon as I press the button, it instantly reacts. So I find that lower input latency a welcome improvement for these kind of games. There's a few other games like this, like Skull the Hero Slayer, that also benefit from that AMOLED panel. One game I played a lot on my flight to Japan was Loop Hero. I think the reason I played a lot of this was because it has a lot of replay value, and it's got some good strategy elements in it too. It has full native controller support, so I can easily access everything that I need to with the controls. I played a lot of this on the RP Mini, but because the RP Mini has a custom screen resolution, it did have some bezels on the sides. The screen elements are already small on this, and on that small screen, it made it a little hard to see. I still had a lot of fun though, and I just held it closer to my face. But with this held up a little closer, all the elements are still very visible. There's probably a scaling option too, but honestly, I just totally forgot to check. Let's jump up a little bit more, up to Streets of Rage 4. I just recently bought this on Android before I went on vacation. I have to admit, I didn't really play this on my flight or my vacation in general, but it's cool to have this on Android. This game has a lot of bright, vibrant colors, so it looks extra good on this panel. I actually really appreciate that they put the D-pad on the top. I played a lot of this on the Sega Genesis back in the day, so it's pretty nostalgic to me to use the D-pad for this. If you grab the Retroid Pocket 5 and you're interested in beat-em-up titles, make sure to check this one out. I've actually been playing a lot more Android gaming on here than I thought I would, and probably even more than Emulation. One of the other games that I really like is Titan Quest, but unfortunately this one wasn't able to natively load on here, so I had to transfer it over from CX File Explorer, and because of that, unfortunately it just can't download the game files. I got the game installed. When I go play, it asks to download it, but then it just times out, and it doesn't download the files. So unfortunately, I can't play Titan Quest. My all-time favorite for Android games is called Hero Slayer. It's another roguelike, kind of like Dead Cells. It also has native controller support. That makes picking this up and playing it a breeze. Another thing I like about this game on this device is this has a lot of bright, vibrant colors, just like Dead Cells, so it looks really good on here. If you're only going to grab one Android game for your device, I highly recommend checking this one out. Funny enough, this actually has a lot more replayability than most of the other Android games that I picked up. Loop Hero, Dead Cells, Skull the Hero Slayer, and a few others are really good for that. These are direct ports of the PC versions. So even though you're paying less than the PC version, you are getting the full game. It's kind of funny actually think that you can play this natively on Android for much cheaper than you could on PC. The only game I had to turn down the settings on was Wreckfest. That being said, this still plays really good on here, but unfortunately you can't max out the settings. Starting things off with everything at the lowest setting, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So this is running at a flawless 60, so let's bump things up a little bit. Let's set things up to medium. I'm going to turn the screen scaling up to high. Dynamic resolution is going to be balanced. Shadow quality is going to be, let's set the shadow quality to medium. Grass is medium. Effects quality, we're going to set that to high. We're going to leave MSAA anti-aliasing off, and we're going to leave bloom on. That still leaves things at about 60 FPS. So let's set the texture quality to high, and everything else we're going to set to quality and high. I'm not going to set it to ultra yet, but we'll try it right after. And yeah, it's still getting 60 FPS. This device has a lot more horsepower than I thought it would. Let's bump up the settings even more. For texture quality, high is the max setting. Screen scaling, I'm going to turn to ultra. I'm going to turn everything else as high as it'll go. I'm going to turn on sharpening. I'm still going to leave MSAA off, but everything else is going to be set to high and ultra. Well, there was a little dip there that went down to 40. So I'm kind of wondering if it's like an effects thing that makes the FPS drop. For the most part though, it is running at a solid 60. You just get those occasional dips. Could be the dynamic resolution or the screen scaling. Yeah, so about 40, 35, 40, 45. It is playable, but you do feel some slowdowns, so I probably would turn down the settings a little bit. You could also just lock this to 30 FPS and just leave this on extreme. Every game that I tried personally just works really well. I'm extremely impressed with the performance on here. I'm glad they went with the Snapdragon 865. I think this provides a lot of power, but not too much because Android still needs a lot of development. Next thing I want to do is test out the streaming performance. I'm going to go to the settings and set it to enhanced 1080p. Then I'm just going to hit customize. I'm not going to change any of these settings here. Moving over to the next page, I'm going to set it to launch in big picture mode. The bandwidth limit, I'm just going to leave that to about 30 megabits per second. Frame rate limit, I'm going to set that to what the screen is capable of, which is 60 FPS. And the resolution limit, I'm going to set that to 1080p. I'm also going to turn on the performance overlay so we can see what's going on. I'm going to make sure that hardware decoding is turned on, HEVC video, low latency networking, and I'm going to leave uncompressed audio off. I'm going to make sure that direct connection is set to automatic. Then that should be pretty much it. Let's connect and check it out. Now I am going to check this with my Ally X. That's because this has a much better connection than my desktop does. Let's hit play, and there we go. I've connected. So let's load up a game just to see how well this works. I'm also already noticing there's very little latency between these two devices. As soon as I clicked it, it instantly went up on both. You're already noticing there's a little bit of latency, but it's not too bad, and I don't think that's going to affect gameplay at all. So let's load it up. That's pretty impressive. I'm not noticing any jittering or any stutters. Let's zoom in and take a closer look. This is streaming at 1080p and the Ally is getting 45 FPS. We're using hardware decoding. I'm getting an average latency of about 8 milliseconds, but that's jumping down to about 7 to 6 milliseconds randomly, so it's anywhere between 6 to 8 milliseconds. The bit rate is 25,000 kilobytes per second or 25 megabits per second. The good thing is we're not getting any packet loss. This is 0% with only 0.22% frame loss. So this is a very smooth stream. This device also does a really good job at managing thermals. Even with a heavy game running on the background for quite a while, we're looking at only about 30 degrees Celsius on the handles or 86 degrees Fahrenheit. This is true for both of the grips. 31 degrees is still very comfortable. In the center by the heatsink, we're looking at around 32 degrees Celsius. Even up by the exhaust, it's only reaching around 33 to 34 degrees Celsius or 92 degrees Fahrenheit. Right over here seems to be the hottest at 35 degrees Celsius. Still very comfortable, and I've never found it bothering my hands to hold. Now I did just close the benchmark, but looking at the front, it's 27 degrees Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. On the left side, it looks to be about 35 degrees Celsius or 96 degrees Fahrenheit. It's still extremely comfortable, and that's closer to the screen. It's not up by the D-pad, so you're not really going to notice that heat. I'm not going to shoot a laser at the screen, but the screen is actually not too bad either. All in all, Retroid did an excellent job managing the thermals on this chip. This chip is also extremely efficient, and that is definitely showing on these thermals. I'm not having any heat issues, even with the fan set to smart. I would recommend setting the performance mode to performance or standard and just leaving the fan on smart. You're highly unlikely to have issues with the heat on this unit. The battery on this one is kind of interesting because right now the software is not in retail stages. At the lower end, you're looking at around 6, maybe 5 to 6 hours. And that's definitely for your higher end Android gaming and high end emulation. With lower end emulation and light Android gaming, you're looking at probably closer to anywhere from about 12 to 15 hours. But I wouldn't be surprised that people could push this all the way to 17 or 18 hours with some tweaks on the settings. Do I think that the Retroid Pocket 5 is worth it? Absolutely. If you have a few different handhelds here, it might be a little different. What would I recommend between the Retroid Pocket Mini and the Retroid Pocket 5? Well, that's an interesting comparison. The screen on both of these devices is absolutely top-notch. I love the screen on the Mini, and I absolutely adore the screen on the Retroid Pocket 5. If you're only looking to get one of these devices for a mix of everything, I would recommend the Retroid Pocket 5. I would say the Retroid Pocket Mini is for someone that wants portability above all. I've traveled 10,000 miles with the Retroid Pocket Mini, and I don't regret 1 minute. It was absolutely a blast. The games played great on there. It had a lot of horsepower, and the battery was incredible. I played mostly older stuff though, like Sega Genesis, Game Boy, and a little Sega Dreamcast. Sega Dreamcast filled out the screen absolutely perfectly. So I really do like the Retroid Pocket Mini, but if you're only looking to buy one between these two, go for the Retroid Pocket 5. This is going to give you a better balance between every different system. Even if you want some older stuff, you'd always get a nice overlay on the sides. Compared to the Retroid Pocket 4, these two just feel like they're in a completely different class altogether. They feel much better built, and the screen is just no comparison compared to the Retroid Pocket 4. The controls feel the same as their old models. The buttons on the Mini are a little louder, but I don't think they're that bad. So yeah, between these two, if you value portability, get the Mini. If you value a good balance, get the Retroid Pocket 5. So what about versus the Retroid Pocket 4? Or what if you already own the Retroid Pocket 4? Well, I do still really like the Retroid Pocket 4 and the 4 Pro. I just think that the Retroid Pocket 5 is a much better buy. If you don't have any of these, I wouldn't even look at the Retroid Pocket 4. If you value screen quality, the screen on this one is so much better than the previous model. It's worth the upgrade alone. The performance, optimizations, and compatibility are also much better on the Retroid Pocket 5. One thing I think the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro has going for it is these colors. This red was just incredible. I would buy this in the Retroid Pocket 5 in a heartbeat. But I do still really like the 16-bit, and I also ordered a black one of these as well, just to see what it looks like. The good thing about this device in particular is it replaces a lot of devices for a lot of people. You don't need 6 or 7 different devices. You can just buy the Retroid Pocket 5 and be done with it. The most interesting comparison I think anybody can make is the Odin 2 versus the Retroid Pocket 5. Guys, I gotta be honest with you, I've used both of these for a little while and I really prefer one over the other. Can you guess what it is? You know I like a good screen, and because of the screen alone, the Odin 2 just falls behind. The screen on the Retroid Pocket 5 is just far better than anything else I've used. Nothing comes close. I would even go as far as to say, if you have the Odin 2 and you don't find yourself using the power for high-end emulation, and you can get away with a little less, I think the Retroid Pocket 5 is a much better buy. In fact, I don't think I'm going to see myself using the Odin 2 nearly as much. Latency just feels better. All in all, this is a solid upgrade compared to the Odin 2 in many different ways. One of the other big features that the Odin 2 had going for it was ergonomics, but this is still much better than what you would think. I can hold this and it feels extremely comfortable. I could play this all day, no issues. All in all, this is just a solid package on a device. We now have a device that has very little drawbacks, and overall, it's just a solid pick. You can't go wrong with the Retroid Pocket 5. So I think I've found the one device for emulation that I can recommend easily to most people. The Retroid Pocket 5 just makes a lot of sense. But what do you think about the Retroid Pocket 5? Is it worth it for you? Do you prefer this slimmer design, or do you like the thicker one on the Odin 2? Is this too small for you? Or is this just right? I think a lot of people are going to be very impressed with this device. If you want to buy one device and just be done with it, order the Retroid Pocket 5, and I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I've never recommended a device this strongly before, but it just checks off so many boxes, it's hard not to recommend this. The colors are just so sharp. The screen is easily the best upgrade. This just all comes together so nice. What do you think about the Retroid Pocket 5? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Did you pick one up, and what color did you choose? If you have any questions regarding the Retroid Pocket 5, make sure to ask in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and as always, thanks for watching.